When creating our production company, we chose to convey with more conventional horror themes, such as twisted pictures and ghost house pictures. We chose to call ours Purgatory Films, the word purgatory being closely associated with death, which is a common occurrence in the horror genre. The use of religious terminology is also significant, as religion is also the main focus in the film The Exorcist, The Omen and The Devil, while being the main focus in many Exorcist films.
All films, not just within the horror genre, revolve around some sort of conflict, whether it's physical, emotional or verbal, and it's no different in ours, as our sequence opens with verbal conflict between our two protagonists, which ultimately leads to their death. This is also apparent in the opening sequence of the original 1996 Scream, in which the character Casey has a confrontation with the killer, which is quickly turned into an emotional and verbal conflict, which ultimately leads to her death. This theme is continuous throughout the film and the series, but in our sequence, unlike most horror opening sequences, ours opens with the conflict rather than building up from a relaxed situation, such as in Scream and The Woman in Black. In our sequence, rather than the conflict being caused by the antagonist to get his victims, the killer kills the victims because of the argument between them.
The setting for our sequence is also relevant to Wes Craven's theory that in horror films there is always an absence of authority, as in ours, our protagonists are lost in the forest, thereby meaning no authority. In other ways, our sequence goes against Craven's theory, as it states that horror is most effective in stereotypical safe places, thereby giving the illusion that the viewers are in increasing danger. We go against this, as ours is based in a forest, meaning that there is already that feeling of discomfort when alone and lost, but we have increased that fear with the addition of an antagonist. The majority of horror film introductions are set in one of two places, either a supposedly safe, familiar location like a suburban neighbourhood, or a place in which danger could be lurking, making the viewer feel uncomfortable.
Another horror convention we stuck by was that the killer picked off his victims one by one. This is apparent in the majority of horror films, such as The Ring, A Nightmare on Elm Street series, Scream series, and many others. Also, the fact that the second victim discovers the first victim's body, which then leads to her death, is also apparent as it sticks with other horror conventions. The leading chase is also a recurring theme, as it features in Scream's opening title sequence, in which Casey is chased by Ghostface. But ours differs from that, by when our killer gets the victim, we do not actually see her die, along with the first victim. There are just visual indications. Our final shot, in which a quick zoom into the victim's face took direct inspiration from The Ring's opening title sequence, in which the protagonist gets the same zoom-in shot with fear, but we developed this idea, and instead of cutting the image along with the scream, we chose to sound bridge it across to the next scene to imply its impending effect.
The representation of our killer is also significant, as in many ways it defies many horror conventions, as there is no physical representation. This includes no moving objects to reveal a ghostly presence. Instead, we chose to represent our killer through camera shots focused on our victims, in which we could tell that an evil was close. The likes of Paranormal Activity also express the same way, but you know something is there as there is a moving object. While on ours, even though we are pretty certain that something is after our protagonists, the question is still open to whether or not it's all in their heads. As we never see them killed, and we never see any representation of the killer in the storyline. Another way in which we have challenged horror conventions is by revealing our killer's deep backstory really early on in the opening title sequence. The only other horror film of any sort who did a similar thing was in the Blair Witch Project, in which it was being disguised as a documentary. Other than that, there have been next to none, as most allow the main character to discover it, like in Nightmare on Elm Street, but our killer reveals it himself, rather than having the entire focus on the victims. We choose to field half the focus on the killer, rather than leaving him a mystery.
Our representation of the killer's mind, we believe, gives it a psychological feel, as the shots from inside the killer's mind distinguish it from the majority of other horror films such as Scream, The Grudge, Eels, and others in which the protagonist's motives and personality remain a mystery for most, if not the entire film. Another way in which we challenge normal horror conventions is by representing our killer in two ways. On the exterior, he is mysterious and sophisticated and almost ghost-like, as we never see him, and the only indication of him is the terrifying faces of his victims. While on the interior, we use the mise-en-scène to show him as a fragile, deluded and absurdly insane killer. Finally, we also develop ideas in horror as we give our killer a more three-dimensional motive rather than just revenge like the killers in Nightmare on Elm Street and Scream. The motive also reflects his mental state.